everyone out to the Utah Watersheds Council today in Canab, Utah. And we really appreciate Mike Noel and his group inviting us out and showing us around a little bit today. So, Mike, anything you'd like to say to kick things off?
Well, welcome you all here to Kane County and Canab. I think we ought to make this a permanent place to come in January. You know, if you guys want to get out of the north, and we'd love to have you down here. Scott, it's great to have everyone here. It's nice it's hard to get up there for me. I don't like driving anymore, that route, but anyway, it's nice having the media to have these events here. So we're going to give a little presentation later on, but just welcome here this morning. There's some more food. You guys don't eat very much, do you? I planned for cowboys and I got bird and bunny gloves.
Yeah.
I do love me some birds and bunny.
Nobody ate the bacon.
Yeah, all you guys online really missed a great breakfast. Mike puts on a great spread. So
Candy was the bacon lady. She got bacon. And
I
then
got a plate full of bacon.
now they left, man. They left Beaver County, right?
Did Candice serve it all
Thank
up
you,
and do
Scott.
all
Anyway,
that?
Absolutely.
If any questions or anything about this, I bought this land about 20 years ago. She came in late and left early to the table. Yeah, this was purchased when land values were really low, and we bought this whole 400 plus acres for $900,000. It'd probably be $5 or $6 million now. So lucky, I think the Lord is looking out for us, and we have this reservoir. It's filling right now. It fills from Kanab Creek, but I'll talk about that later, Scott. Thanks so much.
Great, absolutely. Thanks, Mike. Appreciate that very much. All right. Yeah, by the way, my name's Scott Paxman. I'll chair this awesome organization for okay, we've got approval of the minutes for October 9th. If anybody can remember that far back, but we've got the minutes attached. So if you've had a chance to look those over, I know Rick has given a couple of comments on those. Any other comments or questions on the minutes? Looking for a motion to approve the minutes.
This is Rick. I'll recommend approval.
Okay, Rick Smith approved. Motion to approve. Look for a second.
Second.
Second from Mark Strap. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Any
Aye.
opposed? Okay, next we'll move right into the reports. We got a report from Canab Creek Virgin River Watershed Council, and Dave's going to do that for us, and I'll give him the mic.
Great. And Mike, chime in here at any time with what we did. I'll just report really quick some of the things we did. Again, my name is Dave Jessup. I'm the Virgin River Water Commissioner. I'm also the Operations Manager for the Washington County Water Conservancy District, and currently the Chair of the Canab Creek Virgin River Watershed Council. So on February 21st, I did a virtual presentation at Google Earth, showing drainages, one of our biggest structures that kind of began the water district in Washington County was the Quell Creek project. We diverted water in a 66-inch pipe back in 1985 into the Quell Creek Reservoir. That kind of began the Washington County water East Hurricane Canal, the Hurricane Canal. Anyway, just kind of gave a presentation on our system there. Also talked about the Virgin River program. Virgin River program was created in 2002 as a result of the Virgin River Management Plan. Its objectives are two things: protect the native species and their habitat, and also to ensure recreational and consumptive needs required for human needs in our area. So we've had a good relationship there as being a part of the Virgin River program. On May 22nd, we did a field tour. We drove by Chief Toker Reservoir. For those of you who don't know, that reservoir is going in there at the junction of Anderson Junction, the Tokerville exit there. Kind of that area where those two come together, kind of that south of that area there, that'll be a 3,800 acre foot reservoir. The foundation of that is done, and then the embankment project was recently awarded to Howard and Reese. We're still working through the last bit of permitting process there. But anyway, we're excited about that project. That project will supply secondary water to Tokerville City, which is currently being supplied by Tokerville Springs, which is some of the most pristine drinking water in the county. So by exchange, we're creating another drinking water source there. We're excited about that one. Quail Creek Diversion Dam, I already spoke about that. We went on site, we looked at that, kind of the heart and soul. That's another project that the Bureau, the Colorado Salinity Control Group and others were looking at desalinating the river at that location. Lots of salts and things that come up there that make that water hard to use downstream. Another project we're looking forward into the future on, maybe more in the distant future. We'll just see how things go with that. The future Warner Valley Reservoir site, we went and looked at that. That's, for those of you that don't know, on SR7, the new, I call it Sand Hollow Highway, kind of near Washington Fields Diversion Dam. That will be a pretty large reservoir. We don't know exactly how big yet, but probably in excess of 30,000 acre feet. And that'll supply secondary water, and it'll be part of our reuse program. And there's a lot going on on that front as well. Then we drove by the Washington Fields Diversion, which is an old historic 1800s diversion. Some very, very old water rights there. And then on September 19th, Mike did a great presentation on the Kanab Creek Watershed, and I'm sure he's going to cover some of that again today. Jay Whalen is proposing the Watershed Council to consider taking on the responsibility of updating 2006 Berger Watershed Management Plan. So we discussed that in that meeting in this very room. And that's kind of the gist of what we did this year.
Questions? I'll just make a comment. It's interesting that I remember when the Quail Creek project was started, it was like, what year was that?
1985.
Were you even born then? How old were you?
I got a little bit of good. I was born in 77, so I was.
You're born, so let's say 85, so you're 8 years old. Anyway, you know how long it took to get that permission to build that? Less than 6 months. And a guy by the name of Dave Everett, he was the lands specialist there. We did that whole reservoir with an EA. You know the difference between an EA and an EIS? It's about $5 million now, or $10 million. It costs tons of money. It takes years. That literally went in a matter of 4 or 5 months to get all the permission to build that. So that's what's changed in our area here. And now, I mean, you could spend 6 months looking at one bird. You know, the Mexican spotted owl, you might spend 6 months on that. So that's what happened there. And we will have a part of that. I don't know if you know this, but we are going to have a water tank on right next to that reservoir. Did you know that?
A water tank?
Yeah, big 40,000 gallon water tank. This is a true story, okay? There's going to be a coffee shop there, big coffee shop. I can't remember the name of it. So they're all over the country. And they came out and found our 40,000 gallon water tank that came from California, and they want to buy it. And they're going to put a handle on it. That's going to be a cup of coffee. And that's all our tank's going to be there, I think. So we're going to have part of it. One time we might want to fill it again, okay, just to make sure we got water here. I'm serious, true story, all right? Brothers, some brothers, no, they're all across the country.
Yeah.
And so they have coffee shops, but they're literally going to buy that big tank from us. Yeah, crazy.
Is it part of the Sapp Brothers deal?
Sapp Brothers, yeah,
Sapp Brothers.
exactly. It is. It's Sapp. He's been bugging me for
I
years.
didn't know that.
How much is that water tank? I go, that's worth a lot of money. Finally got a good strap prices out of it.
Wow.
Anyway, that's great. We've had a good working relationship with Washington County. The first meeting we had, as I took over as general manager, we had Larry Anderson, he was one of my speakers, and Ron Thompson, and we were way back then in the 90s, 1992 or 96, I guess it was. We were talking about Lake Powell Pipeline. That was Larry Anderson's dream thing, and we're still talking about it. We've got 4 years of a good administration that we could get that done this year. We really need to focus on that for Washington County. That is future water that we are going to get hopefully before it goes into California. The little fish they're trying to protect there and going into the ocean. We want to make sure we keep that water. So anyway.
All right. Any questions for Dave or Mike? Presentation. All right, very good. Well, thank you so much. Appreciate that update. Sounds like you're busy on tours and everything else, so that's great. Okay, next report from the Sevier River Watershed, Andy Nickel.
Okay, so I'm Andy Nickel. I'm the current chair of the Sevier River Watershed Council. This year's been a fairly eventful year from us, from organizing to going on a few tours this year. In August, we actually took a tour of, so the recommended tour by the council was of the Lower Sevier Water and Diverting Projects. So this right here is Sevier Bridge. On August 26th, we went to the newly renovated Sevier Bridge Reservoir. We took a tour of it, of the diverting structures and the new spillway here that were just recently completed.
We'll get there. I just want to make sure everyone online can see these too.
Okay.
Maybe. Can you guys see that?
We see it now, Carly.
Yes, thank you.
Yep, I can see it. Thank you.
So this spillway at Sevier Bridge, it has a current capacity of 30,000 CFF. It's what holds back the water for Beaver Lake or Sevier Bridge Reservoir, which has a capacity of 225,000 acre feet. Go ahead. This was done as a Division of Water Resource Dam Safety Upgrade Program. We're actually really proud of this project here. So we toured that. This impounds most of the water for the Delta area and the Lower Sevier. That we water about 55,000 acres in the Delta area. Just another overview of these gates going in. We actually modeled those after some gates that were installed down here. We came down and toured them. We really liked them. They're a hydraulic gate that vertically lifts. The center gate is a dual leaf gate that can either drop down and act as a weir, or it can be lifted out of the water to sluice water underneath it. From there, we went down and to the Delta area and we toured this is Full Creek Reservoir number 2, locally known as the Sinks. It's a reservoir that we have that we don't use because of the high losses, but it was one that everybody wanted to see because of they'd just never seen it. Go ahead. The diverting structure out of the sinks, it's just a big sand area that we don't use unless we're in a high water. Then we went down to DMAT. This is the next, we just recently completed this renovation project. This is a labyrinth weir with a capacity of 43,000 CFS. This was also done with funding from Division of Water Resources as a dam safety upgrade. This is the next reservoir down the line that we divert here for some of the farms, and also Intermountain Power Project has a pumping station here to supply water for their.
What's the purpose of that? I've never seen that before, that labyrinth. What does that do?
So that's a labyrinth weir. Basically by doing the cycles like that, you increase the weir length and thereby can increase the capacity in a smaller footprint.
Oh,
So it's a passive weir. We don't have to man it, maintain it. It's just once we hit that level, it flows over. My understanding is it's one of the largest labyrinth weirs this side of the Mississippi.
Wow.
How often does that spill over? Every year or is it, less frequent than that?
I've personally never seen it spill over because we regulate the water and we keep it in Sevier Bridge Reservoir. So unless there's a major rain event or something in Oak City or Linda Leamington.
And
It
that's in
doesn't.
what county?
What?
What county?
Millard. That's just north of Delta.
Water, you know that, right?
Don't rub it in.
We just wanted you to see it. That's what it looks like on the bottom end.
Hey, I'm glad you're using it. Well, I wish we had one of those at the head, right up there, right by, Cedar Mountain. That's great.
So this is another view just later on in the year. The previous picture was when we actually filled it up so that we could do our initial fill plan and satisfy the requirements there. This is how it normally looks. It's down at a pretty minimal rate. Obviously right there, the spillway's out of water. And then the final place we went to was Gunnison Bend Reservoir. That's the end. That's the last reservoir that we have. It's a small reservoir with a capacity of about 3,500 acre feet. From there, you can see the canals that divert out to the surrounding farms. After that, during our October meeting, we discussed a tamarack in and around Lindell. It's part of their residential interface with wildfires. It's a wildfire prevention program, plus it also increases and helps water use around the river. So you can see up there in the slides that they pile up all the tamarisks, put them in a pile, burn them, and then the irrigation companies down there have partnered with them by an aerial application of an herbicide to try to combat the regrowth. We've seen some pretty good results because of this and an improvement in our watershed. And that's
Andy, who's funding that?
It's a partnership with SITLA, State Lands, or not, the State Forestry and Fire. They've got a grant to do that. So sorry, I misspoke. And then we've with them to help remediate some of those tamarisks that are quite prone. Russian olive.
Bank stabilization.
Yeah. But we've done this this is right there in Lindell, Leamington. If you're familiar with Leamington, they've built pretty close to the river. And so there's a really a lot of residential control.
Andy, are you? See it?
Well, other than that, that's pretty much our year in a recap.
Are you after your mechanical removal of the tamarisk, are you spraying? How are you mitigating the new growth?
We're spraying. We're going in with the drone and we apply it to, we've got the best results from that. Years ago, we actually tried a beetle that we thought had died. Yeah. We put a beetle out by the dry lake, which is about 40 miles away from Delta. We thought it had died, and then actually about 4 years ago, the beetle showed up and took all the trees out, and then it disappeared. But we've done this. We've gone in with a drone, sprayed it, and we're getting pretty good results.
That may make a future agenda item at some point. Is what's
I don't
Candice?
know if they can hear you, Sterling. Oh, yeah, he's very good.
That may make a future agenda item down the road for this council. Is what has been done in recent years to fight off tamarisk and funding sources. What progress are we making, if any? Some of those kinds of topics.
Yeah, any of the invasive species, right? I mean, not just tamarisk, but
Mighty. One other question, Andy, if I might, Mr. Chair?
Yes.
What, have you ever used cattle? I know in some of, the frag situations up north, they use cattle for that type of control. Have you ever thought of that?
So most
Cattle eat tamarisk, I guess is my real question.
they hide in it really well. If you've ever tried to get a cow out of a tamarack patch, you know what hell on earth looks like. Okay, sorry. Most of those areas do have active cattle grazing going on, and we're hoping that this will alleviate the tamarack, get rid of them and hopefully get some grasses to come back so we can continue to graze in those bottoms.
That's great, thank you.
Some of the local ranchers have also teamed up, the going in and disking. I do understand that we do have the Soil Conservation District down there has bought a no-till drill to try to go in and reseed with some grasses to help bring those grazing lands back.
So a question, Andy, on Yuba, I know they kept it down or purposely haven't been filling it for the last couple of years. Was it, be able to fill it this spring?
So that was only a 1 year
Oh,
situation. It was just a 1 year situation. When we were doing the rehabilitation project, we had the downstream toe torn apart. Basically, we took our dam and we cut it in half. The downstream half was projected to flow in. Yeah. Once we completed the downstream embankment, the stability burn, we've been able to store actually the last couple of years.
Awesome. Good. Any other questions? Very good. Thank you so much for that presentation. Okay, on to the next one.
Online, maybe?
Sorry.
Warren?
We shot before, didn't have.
Apparently he doesn't have a comment.
No question from Warren?
Well, actually, yes, it sounds a little choppy out here, folks. So we're trying to keep up. Andy, the reason that Sevier Bridge hasn't been filled the last 2 years is because you just don't have the water. Isn't that the gist of it?
Yes.
Didn't want to break it up.
We would love to fill it every year, but have the water supply to do so.
Yeah. And the other comment, I've been told, and I don't know if you've heard, I was told by Roger Walker actually that the oldest dam on the Sevier is Gunnison Bend. So the dam was built down at the end, and then dam building started up above, and that's when the little dynamite might have been involved with some dams and so on, and the farmers got together and decided we need to do something better than this. That's how the Cox Decree was put together by a river-wide Watersheds Council. That's a predecessor to what we're doing here.
Great, good comments. Thank you, Warren. Okay, let's move on to our next report by the Cedar Beaver Watershed Council. Commissioner Tammy.
Yeah,
Yes.
sounds like their sound isn't very good.
Okay, good to hear you, Warren. Fellow Hinkleyite. You've been around a lot longer than I have. Know the history on all of this stuff.
Well, a lot longer than you have.
I actually
Mike and I are sharing that responsibility.
Well, my last year in Millard County was when the dam broke and those kind of issues, dams were awful. We had a pretty good, leading the blind kind of thing in, the Cedar and Beaver Watershed. So our first meeting was just trying to get organized, and we had a big crowd. There, and basically all we came up with was who serves in which capacity and elected our officers. And so Commissioner Brandon Yardley will be our chairman from Beaver County. Vice Chair Dave Harris out of Cedar. Stephanie Hill's our secretary, and then I'm the state council. And this is the first time I showed up at the state meeting, so sorry about that. But full calendar trying to fit things in. Our second meeting, we actually met in Cedar, and we're having a lot of good participation, and we toured. I didn't take any other pictures, which I should have done, but the recharge projects they've done in Iron County and around Cedar City, and they put a lot of work and effort into that. Same problem, there's just no water to recharge with, right? So, and then Brandon had give a report on the water. He's on that state water optimization group. And then, so then our summer meeting in August, we had the state water optimization, talked about the Parowan Valley. This is pretty simple. Warren led a pretty detailed discussion on, there we had, the meeting was there at the Beaver County Fairgrounds, and then we did a tour of the Twin Emma Minersville Irrigation Company's, our watershed project, and we kind of have all the same issues there. Most of our issues, you can go to the next picture. Most of our issues are a lot of Russian olive, a lot of willows. Unfortunately, the stream embankment enhancement and whatever they call the restoration stuff, they planted a lot of willows upstream 30 years ago, and now it's just a hazard everywhere else. And I can remember them planting them and fighting and arguing with them that that's going to be a problem, but nobody listens. And so anyways, we have a lot of those issues now. But DNR spent the last probably 5 or 6 years coming in and burying pure white rock up and down which is hilarious. It sticks out like a sore thumb, but it's overgrown now, but there is some stream stabilization there. There's been a lot of money put into it from the state, the DNR, and that. There's a group, I can't remember what they're called, out of Vegas. There's some fishing bunch. Blue Ribbon or something, Anyway, they hate that we pulled the willows and stuff out, and they were really fighting us, but we do have a lot of invasive weeds and stuff. I wish we could come in there and spray. Maybe that's what we need to talk about, is drones and come in and spray and some of that kind of stuff. But the river itself, you can go to the next slide. The river itself is cleaned up a lot. It's been a big deal. Good partnership with our 2 irrigation companies, Myersville and Rocky Ford, bought this big 80-acre strip through the river, and we partnered with that. So it's one of those walk in, walk out, fishery. We allow people to the access. It's not blocked off, and so they can hunt. A lot of duck hunters and fishermen, and we do graze cattle down through there, and so it's made a big difference on our river. Top to bottom, our river, luckily our ancestors built a lot of lakes. There's a whole series of lakes, and it's a small river, doesn't pack a lot of miles, but we've got a lot of storage along there. I wish we had more. Everybody's kind of working together for the most part. One of our biggest issues is Rocky Ford is the last man on the ditch, and we're the only ones that measure. Actually, Minersville and Rocky Ford both measure, but we're trying to get that fixed on up the line. So let's see. I think that's all we had on that meeting. And then our last meeting, we talked about the public lands lawsuit, which is now again as of yesterday. But and then we talked. Jake Benson from the Grazing Improvement Program, he talked about the watershed treatments. We had a lot of discussion about shared stewardship, and we got a really good project. And some of you have probably seen the video we put together 2 or 3 years ago about the Beaver River watershed. And that's top to bottom, and we did it with Forest Service, and I think, I can't remember, it was you guys' office, weren't you in on some of that too, Teresa?
The what?
That, when we did that shared stewardship video?
Mhm.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So that's something that I think, you know, maybe somewhere down the road, I can either share the video or you can use it at one of these meetings, but shared stewardship brings all the different partners to the table on watershed management. And that's all we need.
Excellent. Sounds like you've been busy. So any comments, questions for Dan? Warren, go ahead.
Yeah, well, thank you. Tammy, I'm curious, maybe for you and the other watersheds as well. Are you seeing some value to having the watershed meetings? Has it become something more than just another meeting? Are you seeing some progress with coordination, planning, any of those sorts of things? And maybe another way to ask that question is, what do you see the future of the Watershed Council being over the next year?
Well, I think there's a lot of networking and, you know, I think sharing of information and that, like Sterling was saying, we've done the Tamarask treatment, you know, maybe what best practices are. Across the state, we're so similar yet so different, and how you, like, I kind of have to laugh when you were talking about reseeding from the alkali soil.
Yeah.
Saltgrass, let's see, what do we plant there with the no tree? I have a suggestion. So kind of a history, and those of you that have driven that back road from Delta to Cedar City, that's our ranch through there, and back when I left in '83, that river was full of water. The Beaver River actually met the Sevier River out in the Sevier Drive. How much water we have. Well, before that, for however many years, that water had never run, the river had never run, and so we're nothing but sand dunes. And the Tamarask had come in, and that's the only thing that kept the sand off the highway. If anybody remembers that road, you couldn't drive that road because of the sand. It was just nonstop drifting. And so then somebody, in all their ultimate wisdom, brought the beaver in there and killed the Tamarask. No, this was down at my house. Actually, part of it. But
Maybe that's
we
what
had sand problems again. So it's really nice that you get those big water years, but you know, kills the beetle and lets the Tamarask grow. But there's no irrigating on that end of the river.
You speak of these big water years like they come around that often.
Well,
I'd like to see one.
You know what's really funny in Beaver County, we get them about every 10 years.
We're on a 10 to 15 year cycle.
And we're very thankful for that.
Yeah.
Sterling, did you have a comment?
Yeah, I think my thoughts are, I think where Warren's at least to some degree. I listened to these presentations. And in my mind, I'm thinking these local watersheds, and you know, we're hitting our 1-year anniversaries for most all of us. And it appears as though we've hit the ground well with tours and good education. I'm not losing any sleep over this, but it does cross my mind. Will we hit a peak and the local watershed councils will start to lose their focus and their drive, their motivation, their energy, their excitement? And they'll just meet to meet without a purpose. And how could we, if there's any truth to some of that, at least for some of the councils, how can we work now to avoid that? To keep our local chairs and leadership energized and moving in a good way.
There needs to be a purpose.
Yeah, absolutely. That's always been the challenge, right? Candice, go ahead.
Mr. Chair, if I might, thank you. I want, and I've mentioned this in some previous meetings, but we are starting this next process with the state water plan, with the unified water infrastructure plan. And in my opinion, we need those local experts and resources available to help us to review data, to help us understand local issues and needs. So that can be compiled up into the state water plan. With the passage of HB 280 from this last session, it revamped the state water plan statute. And so I think there's a lot of opportunity to do meaningful work in that way. And I know that's just one piece, but from my perspective, I think the local watershed councils will be extremely helpful in those planning efforts.
Good point. Yes, Mike.
I wondered about this when we first started it, but what I'm finding out is that we all have the overall problem of trying to develop our water rights, use them in an efficient manner, and to work together. The fact that we have the state engineer, we have water resources here, and you're hearing it, and then we have the legislature that created this. There's some new programs that are out there. One of the things I see, if we don't do this, if we don't stay together, united with these watersheds, especially in the rural areas in southern Utah where the majority of the land is managed by the federal government, we're going to get left out. The water engineer was showing me some things of some legislation right now that keyed off my legislation from 20 years ago regarding BLM water rights and on public water reserves. They're going to file, how many did you say? I mean, I don't want to steal your thunder. How many they're talking about?
So just in a previous meeting, they had mentioned like 6,000.
6,000? So 6,000 public water reserves. Why do you think they're doing that? That's like areas of an ACECs, all of these things. It's just another step and another layer of bureaucracy that will affect your water rights in the future and the use of those water rights. So I think it's beneficial. Warren, I mean, you and I have been at this, like you said, a long time, but I think it's very helpful to get this policymakers together and to let people know how important water is. This has been a struggle for Utah since it was named state, and it continues to be a struggle. The changes in water use from agriculture to culinary water is occurring all the time. I fully expect to see after this disaster in California, a whole bunch of people moving here to southern Utah and the map. I mean, it's going to happen. It really is, because it takes 2 years to get a permit to build in those areas before you get a permit. So where are they going to go? I just saw last night that person may have bid to rent a house and he bid $30,000 a month, and he was outbid at $50,000 a month to rent a house. So it's crazy. It's insane. Anyway, I think it's a good thing. Scott, you've led well. Everybody that's come, I'm learning a lot. We're partners with Washington County. We've got a huge project that's important, Lake Bell Pipeline. We've got 4 years now to build this reservoir, gold reservoir. We're running into problems. We were with the Zion National Park. They just keep digging in their heels, and we won a lawsuit. We had an agreement. We settled a lawsuit that said that we could build the dam, and we're still sitting here after 7, 8, 9 years to try to get the dam built. So we think with this new administration, we'll be able to do it. I see some really good things happening from Department of Interior, Department of Ag. You'll see some things happen that'll flow down to us, no pun intended with the flowing, but it's coming this way. And hopefully we can continue to do that. So I'd say information is good. I'm very happy. Plus we like having you come down here, adds to our economy a little bit. You come down.
Thank you, Mike. I appreciate it. Teresa.
Just wanted to kind of echo the comments. I was, as far as the watershed councils, at first I was kind of like, okay, what's the purpose here? Let's make sure that it's not just another meeting to have a meeting. I'm very much on that. But from the state engineer standpoint, or our office, we have 7 regional offices across the state for a reason. And it's because each of those areas are unique. They have different issues, different struggles, but I think the watershed councils, from what I see, helps bring those together. So when you have an issue in Beaver County, somebody in Box Elder County may, just different issues, or Cache County, different issues, but sometimes the solutions that were used somewhere could help someone else. And I think this maybe gives a forum to share those. I know like local councils, to keep those viable, bringing the information to the state council, I think is critical. But maybe just have meetings with purpose in the agenda. If there's things like the state water plan to discuss, one of the things I would have added to the Kane Virgin report, Sand Hollow meeting that's tonight for groundwater. That's a very serious situation. The water users have asked me to do a groundwater plan for the Sand Hollow, but it's things like that that I think are, if it can be done correctly. So.
Thank you, Chris. Looks like we have a hand raised with, Jody Gale.
I'll just jump in a little bit and reiterate other comments. I think involvement in state watershed planning is an important role of the state watershed council as well as the local watershed councils. As an educator, I greatly value the opportunity to network and learn more about what's happening with water-related issues, improvements that are happening in our respective councils. But I would like to maybe also make the suggestion of the importance of being aware of legislation that's upcoming, as well as recent legislation on water-related law within the state. We've had hundreds of bills literally proposed the last 4 or 5 years. Many have passed, and it's changing the landscape of water use within the state. It would help me to have a more regular update on what's being proposed and considered by the legislature, an update from Teresa on what her needs are within her respective offices. I will maybe reiterate in conclusion a question that I asked at our first Watershed Council meeting here in the Sevier River system. Is it an appropriate role for the local watershed councils as well as the state watershed council to get involved in, I won't use the word lobbying, but I will ask the question if it's part of our role to get involved in supporting or not supporting various legislation as we try and represent farmers, ranchers, those who are using the water within our respective areas. I see a role here that for the Watershed Council to get our oar in, so to speak, to either support or oppose various pieces of legislation that will affect water use within our respective councils.
Thank you. Great comments. Yes, the last meeting, right? If I remember minutes, we organized a legislative subcommittee from the council, from the state council, to put together some things that we felt like needed to go to the legislature, either changes in Watershed Council's outline information or some new legislation that we might suggest. So we'd be open to take any suggestions from any of the members of the local or state council to at least present some of those to the legislators. We have the opportunity to present to the legislators a couple of times a year. It's probably coming right up. Is that right, Candice? Oh man. But
Yeah, typically we report out in the fall. The October, November interim meetings is what we've done in the past.
Okay, perfect.
Do we have an appropriation each year for this council? If we do, what is it?
So the Division of Water Resources has an appropriation for administration to help with it. So Carly Kane's role is paid out of that, but there was no ongoing appropriation for councils or local beyond that.
Laura Beaver.
Oh, Laura Briefer's got a hand up.
She's unmuted.
Can't hear you, Laura.
She's muted.
There we go. I'm muted, sorry.
Oh.
So whenever someone in my organization has starts speaking on mute, we require $10 to go to our Project Water Assist program. So I will put some in today. But I do want to just reiterate what I heard from others today about the importance of the watershed councils, and especially on the local level. And also one other thing that we've found on the Jordan River Watershed Council is potential opportunity, leveraging of opportunities and alignment of purpose by like municipalities along the entire reach of the Jordan River. Maybe in the future, a little bit more coordination and less fragmentation of policy making across the Jordan River and other parts of the watershed. And one example I'll give is, being in an urban area, and you've probably seen this in the news a lot, but we've had issues with unhoused populations along our waterways, especially the Jordan River. And being able to work together, with our different municipalities in the venue of the Watershed Council to talk about the different things that we might be doing to take care of that population and also address water quality concerns due to sanitation issues. Like that's a really, really important thing. So while we're, pretty new in that we're just up and running over the last year, I see a lot of real good opportunity to leverage a lot of different actions and policymaking across the watersheds, and invite other agencies such as the U.S. Forest Service, the Army Corps of Engineers, and other stakeholders that sometimes we don't all get to see at the same time. So less piecemeal decision making.
Right, yeah, great point. Warren has his hand up.
Well, thank you. I was going to try to put a cap on this, but I see Mike just raise his hand. But if you don't believe the power of watershed councils, when you can get Mike Noel, Soren Simonson, Nathan Doggs, and Mark Stratton all in the same room in Canab, Utah. Now that's the watershed councils.
Hey, thank you. We've got Mike Lewers with a comment, or Larson, Lars.
Yeah, in a second what Warren said, but back to what Jody was talking about. Do the local watershed councils, should we get involved lobbying at the state level, or should we just run that through the state watershed council? Need a little guidance on that so we're all on the same page, but there's a lot of issues that one watershed council may support and the other one won't. I don't know how we deal with that. Can you give us a little more guidance on that?
Yeah, any suggestions from this council? Mark?
Warren will, I'm sure, have potentially something else to say about this, but under the statute, the state council is specifically given direction to provide advice to the legislature. That same language does appear in the local watersheds councils. So I think, Mike, for your point, it would be probably really beneficial if that could flow through the state council. Now, every member of the local council, however, should feel free to lobby, on their own behalf, but probably not on behalf of the watershed council itself. That would be my sense of what I see in the way that the statute was drafted, was that state policy recommendations flow to the state council, and then you all are as active as you need to be on your own. And you can certainly coordinate that, I think, locally, but it wouldn't be on behalf of the local watershed council.
Yes, I agree with that. Thanks, Mark.
Yeah, Mr. Chair, since Mark called me out, but since I'm not inclined to speak up in these meetings otherwise, if yeah, to Mike's question, certainly if there's a local issue that you think you need to, give a call to your local rep or so on. But the virtue of being able to roll these things up to the statewide council is you may find that you have a lot of support from other councils. And speaking with that louder, bigger, united voice is one of the things we envision in putting this structure together. And we modeled it somewhat, if you will, on the Association of Governments and the work that's done there through through transportation planning. As they roll those issues up, the transportation, it's amazing how effective they are. And so we anticipated the same sort of strength in numbers by coordinating through the State Watershed Council. I think it's your call, but don't forget that you have friends in other watershed councils around the state that may support your issues, and working through the State Watershed Council with its statutory mandate, as Mark pointed out, would strengthen your voice. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Warren. Great point. I like that. We definitely do have strength in numbers when it comes to certain things. Mike, go ahead.
And just a quick comment on that, Warren, and also to Teresa and Candice. Do we have a list of bills this year, water bills, and how do we go about getting those? Are you going to get those to this council? Are you going to talk about them today, or?
Yeah, actually, under the legislative updates, I have 4 that I was gonna bring to the council's attention that kind of are in my space. So
these would be key bills. I mean, there's always a lot of different water bills and ones that come up, but it's really nice to get that from you guys that are tracking those bills. We get some things that were on that list, but I think it's helpful to do that. But again, one of those bills, water bill, could be beneficial to one watershed area and could be detrimental to another. Example, David Hinkins, when we had the bill regarding, being able to require people in our area to build the metering of water for here, which we're presently doing. We're metering all of our secondary water. David came back, Senator Hinkins came back and said, well, I'm not going to meter our water. You're going to dump it in the Great Salt Lake. So you see the disconnect there, but really, in reality, I would say 90% of the people down here are saying the same thing. Why should we dump in the Great Salt Lake? We're down there trying to save water. We're doing everything we can to protect our watersheds, and then you guys are dumping in the Great Salt Lake. Now, I don't want to get into that argument, but I can just tell you, those are things that we should discuss as a watershed council to make sure we're on the same page. Do you want your water dumped into the Great Salt Lake? She's a farmer like me. I think if we're talking about Lake Bonneville coming back, that's a good idea. It's going to take a long time to fix that. Although
another resource task force.
Mr. Chair, can I jump in on that just before we get? We contemplated that this watershed council would be a place where those kind of issues can be coordinated, as Mike suggested. It's a lot better place to discuss and resolve issues than to try to do it in front of a legislative committee.
Thanks, Warren. Tammy first and then Rick.
So I just wanted to hop in on some of these things. Most of you that know me, I've been in county politics for 10 years. And I'm also like Warren, I usually don't take a back seat. I don't have a problem giving an opinion or getting in the middle of the dogfight. But I do think that there's value specifically with all of us and our individual watershed councils to make sure you're sharing this information with your irrigation companies, with your locally elected officials who should be representing you on a state level. Not only your county commissioners now, but also your state representatives. I know we really missed Mike Noel as our representative until we got Carl Albrecht, and then he's been awesome. But I think that message needs to go on, and I do agree with Warren. I think there's value, I know there's value in having friends, especially when you go to battle, but, you have a stronger voice coming through that watershed council, and so I think there's a huge value.
Sorry, I have the sun in my eyes.
Rick Smith, did you need?
Yeah, I really, I'm just saying, the Utah Water Task Force is a good resource to look at legislation that.
Yes, and run some legislation by, and yeah, Candice.
Mr. Chair, I think having a list provided to this group that could be added to would be really helpful. I know the Division of Water Resources has one, but maybe if there was kind of one list that people could add things to, and sometimes we learn about things we didn't have on our list, so lots of people with lots of eyes would be great. I know John Williams started one, so maybe that could be kind of sent out to this group and people could add to it, make sure it has what everyone is looking for.
Great. Okay, let's move on through the agenda. We're a little behind, but we're doing good. Had a great discussion. So next one is a presentation on integration of existing funds study by Candice.
Thank you.
Candice.
Hey, Carly's gonna pull up a presentation. I'm really grateful to have an opportunity to present this to you. Some of you may have seen this yep, that's the one. As I have presented it a couple times last fall at different committee meetings and those type of things, and the Legislative Water Development Commission meeting. But I do want you all to be aware that there are some pretty significant ongoing changes with how the state will fund water projects in the next year or so. So next slide, please, Carly. Yes. So as she's kind of moving forward, one, there's been a lot of estimates on what our water infrastructure needs are, and this has been communicated to the legislature. Prep 16, the Division of Water Resources with the State Water Infrastructure Plan estimated $38 billion of need for kind of drinking water side, kind of water supply side things. There was an estimate for water quality needs, stormwater, wastewater treatment of roughly 15 billion. Another 6 billion was estimated for irrigation companies and canals. So pretty significant. The American Society of Civil Engineers kind of rated us a little bit all over the place. Some were doing okay and others we could do a lot better in. So we know we have this need. Next slide, please. Last year, there was HB 280 that was passed by Representative Snyder, passed by the legislature, and it does a lot of things. As I was talking to Mike earlier, it originally came out with the one bill to do it all, and it got some pushback, and so it kind of got pieced out a little bit over the next several years. Generally, one of the things that was first required was that all of the different water funding agencies, and I'll get into that in just a little bit, were required to submit to the Legislative Management Committee, the governor, Legislative Water Development Commission, this kind of status of funds. So we did that already last year. And then we were also required to complete an integration of existing funds. And how will our existing funds work in this kind of new process? By June 30th of this year, we're required to have a relevant agency plan. So kind of lists of infrastructure projects needed in our different kind of capacities. There's also a fee study. So this was an idea, one of the ideas of how can we get more money for a Utah water infrastructure project. There was an idea thrown out that maybe we could charge some sort of fee to some sort of user. It's not really spelled out specifically, but we're required to do a study to that fact, and that will be done October 31st. We're hiring a consultant to help us with that analysis. We'll have a work group set up as well. And then March of next year, we're required to have a unified water infrastructure plan. And the big picture of this is, if you're familiar with the transportation plan, is a list of prioritized projects for the state, so that the state can come in and be like, these are the most important projects. I had a great question and conversation with Rick of like, well, how do you prioritize? Great question. That's something that we have to work through in the rulemaking process. We'll have a ranking and prioritization of all those projects. We'll provide it to the Legislative Water Development Commission. And then also the end of 2026, we have a new state water plan that's required to be done. So we have a lot of irons in the fire, but I want you kind of to be aware of HB 280 and what it's doing, and what the kind of next year or two looks like. And then if we go to the next slide, I'll kind of talk a little bit about the role of the Water Development Coordinating Council. So this is a council that was actually put together, I think it was 1983 or 1984, of all of the different water funding agencies for the state, and really with the goal of trying to coordinate on different funding pots, who's funding what projects, who's applying for different projects. They also included additional information or tasks for the council to engage in planning and prioritization of the projects and expend money out of the water infrastructure fund, which is I should have mentioned, a newly created fund in HB 280. It was put in with a little bit of seed money, 2.5 million, which is covering some of the studies and some staffing. And we are also getting some support from a consultant to help us gather all those water infrastructure projects. Next slide, please. So this is who's on the council. The director of the Division of Water Resources, John Mackey from Water Quality, Nathan Lundstedt from Drinking Water. We have the state treasurer. We have a UDAF representative, Jim Bocut, Workforce Services and Housing and Community Development. That's really like the CIB board. And then we have a new member, a large water conservancy district was added to with the change in HB 280, and so Zach Renstrom is participating there. Next slide. So really the focus of this talk, I wanted to give you the big outline and the big overview, but really wanted to kind of spend a couple minutes talking about the integration of existing fund study that we did. So that's really kind of that big picture, is how are all these different state funds going to work with this new process? Next slide, please. And I can send you all a copy of it. So one of the things is we met all summer long last year, and we're trying to figure this out. We spent time compiling a really detailed list of all of the different state funding sources out there for water, what they're used for. Is it loans? Is it grants? So we have this big kind of, it's really an Excel sheet, but information of that. But as we were doing that, we were like, well, what is this process going to look like? It was kind of a chicken or an egg thing. Can we really understand what these existing funds and how they're going to integrate if we don't understand the process? So we spent time developing kind of a framework on how this process may work. And there will likely be legislation to enact some of the recommendations. Actually, I know there will be some of the recommendations out of this study, but I am also open for feedback on your guys' thoughts. So one, we had looked at the kind of every 4-year process that this unified water infrastructure plan would be updated on. And then each of the relevant agencies, the Drinking Water Board, Water Quality Board, and the Board of Water Resources would develop these relevant agency plans that kind of have those prioritized lists. And then the Water Development Coordinating Council will bring those lists together and help to prioritize them. And then we'll make updates to the water infrastructure, unified water infrastructure project list. Representative Snyder was really like, I just want the list, and I want to call it the WIP list because they already have a tip list. I don't know. But he just wants this list, and I kind of understand why. If you guys remember, a couple of years ago when the state did have the legislature had large surpluses and appropriations and federal infusion of money. Maybe not every, but a lot of water entities came to them and said, we need money for our project. And the legislature funded a lot of those projects. But one of the things I've heard is they didn't necessarily know, other than that it was a priority for their area, is it a priority for the state? And so that was some of the support that I heard from Representative Snyder. Next slide, please. And so then we kind of drill down to what will the annual process look like. Right now, each board has their own application periods, their own cycle, their own timing. And so part of the goal is to help make it simpler in theory, right? That there is just one place you go apply, that you don't have to go apply for 2 or 3 different boards. You can just go apply one place, and then the Water Development Coordinating Council will kind of put that project to where it should go as far as where is funding available or what entity may oversee it. This is very different than how we currently do it. Depending on the board, my understanding is like water quality, I think they have an annual application project or process. The Division of Drinking Water, I think, has 3 times a year. The Board of Water Resources meets 9 times a year, and we pretty much have applications open anytime. So that would be a pretty significant change. We also will take the time to compare the applications that received against the Unified Water Infrastructure Plan project list. And then that would be assigned to the different boards that have different pots of money available. And then those funding agencies will take that and go and move forward with those. Next slide. And so this is kind of the next stage of, once a project has kind of been assigned, is there board funds available to whatever board? So if there's let's say a wastewater treatment plant that needs to go in, and they went to the water quality board to get funded. If water quality has that funding available, the council will just say, go fund it. Our goal is not to recreate the work that's already being done between these agencies. We don't want to have the Water Development Coordinating Council. The last thing I want to do is manage more people under that council. So we would push that to those experts and the people who are already funding those in those different funding agencies. And whether it's a loan or a grant, it'll go through that process. And then annually, each board will evaluate their funds and say, well, do we have any excess funds that could be shifted to this water infrastructure fund? So that's kind of one side of it. And then if there weren't funds available, then it would go to the council, and then the council would say, well, do we have monies in the water infrastructure fund? Or can we get an additional appropriation for the legislature? Is there any existing funds that we can move into this to help cover these priority projects? And as I mentioned, we are currently in the process of doing the fee study. Is there any additional resources through there? So we kind of see those 3 mechanisms will be hopefully available to help fund water infrastructure projects and contribute to the WIF. But that's, I would say, still to be seen on how all of these funds, all of these things work. We do anticipate that our goal, and my understanding from Representative Snyder, his goal is to have more funds available. So we won't be just cutting the pie in smaller pieces, but that there would be a larger pie, a larger pot of money to use from. That's at least the goal. Next slide. So these were the final recommendations that came out of the existing fund study. Is there was specific things that we were supposed to look at, and one of was looking at the Water Development Coordinating Council makeup, and there were at that time was no recommended changes since we already had a change the previous year. We did mention that we do need additional state funding to help fund water infrastructure projects. There will likely need to be grants for technical assistance for smaller water suppliers and wastewater utilities and irrigation companies. There will need to be more state investment. Originally in HB 280, there was the relevant agencies included the Department of Agriculture and Food and the Housing and Community Development Division. What we learned in those funding pots of money, yes, they do fund some water projects, but they also fund lots of other things. So it made sense that we still want them on the council and they're an important representation, but not to have to do all the things that relevant agencies have to do. And then we also talked about modifying the statute to allow some of the consolidation and transfers that we were talking about to occur, and then make sure that this is aligned with the overarching process of when we are going to have a unified water infrastructure plan. We don't want to come out to make these changes today when we're not there yet. So just making sure those processes are aligned. And so there is a bill. I'm hoping will be numbered today. It's pretty close. That will make some of these recommendations into a bill. And hopefully we can keep moving forward with that process.
Who's running the bill?
Representative Snyder. That's what I have for you guys today. Yeah, happy to take any questions.
Any questions, Mark?
Yeah, so, I think a question might come up is, why are we still using 3 groups to disperse money? And I'm assuming that that's because each of those 3 groups still administers federal funds and has certain parameters that get, that they need to follow, and they know how to do that. But can you explain a little bit more why we're retaining the 3 separate funding groups?
Yeah, that's a great question. And there was also some discussion about that. Obviously, the Division of Water Quality and the Division of Drinking Water administer the federal funds that come through the SRFs, and it would take a significant effort to try to merge those into one type of group or board. We also did see that there are experts within each of those divisions to kind of maintain those funds and understand the projects. And the boards that are already created are kind of already knowledgeable in their kind of lanes. So those were some of the reasons. It was at one point considered of what if we have one board to rule them all that would do all of the funding. I don't think that was a direction that anyone was open to going right then. But could be still discussed in the future.
Nice.
I'm just gonna ask you, Candice, well, I think as a Water Conservancy District General Manager, and we're dealing with about almost 4,000 service connections spread across the entire county. And it's a whole different situation than an urban situation. Your cost per connection is so much higher because you're maintaining all those water lines, and it's very difficult. So water resources, we can usually get a loan, even zero interest loan, but you can never get any grant unless you're dam safety grant. Drinking water, if they have funds in the SRF, and the last few years, they've had all the ARPA money that's come in. So that's been great to be able to upgrade systems within the system. So how do we, in the future, how do we, as a rural area with a small population, how do we deal with that bureaucracy that we have to deal with to get the funds we need to move forward? Because it's hard. We tax every single entity, every single property in this county, every house, every business. And we get 4 million tourists coming through here, which affects the whole state. We don't tax them. We don't get anything from it. We get some gas tax and some room tax, but that's it. So it's very difficult to provide water resources for 4 million tourists coming through an area and not have the funds to pay for it. And we can't just keep piling that on to our property owners. So I don't know what's the answer. The state's been great. You've been wonderful on water resources, but I hope that doesn't go away because we need that. And what we're finding is that more and more people are coming here. We're kind of at the beginning of what the Watershed front was 50 years ago. We're at the beginning of that, and we're trying to plan for that so we don't run into the problems in the future. Like, well, hey, we had no idea we have to shut off building permits because we don't have enough water, we don't have enough storage, we don't have enough lines, all those things. So this is good the way you're doing it, but there's another process that goes on the legislature, even on the transportation. Depending on the lobbyists you have, is when you get the funding. If Greg Curtis is running it, you're going to get the funds. I mean, he's been around, and 16 years ago, I know where a lot of things work, and it's not necessarily the right way, but it's the way to get things done. And so you go those different areas. What suggestions do you have for that?
Yeah, I think that's a really good question, and I think that has been one of the concerns that we've had from the Board of Water Resources perspective and my division's perspective is, how does this all relate? One of the things that we tried to do within this process, and it goes into detail in the report, is to set up buckets. So at least we're not comparing an irrigation project to a drinking water project or something like that, but there would be different buckets that are evaluated against like projects. We are required to come up with a ranking and prioritization process, and we do need to develop rules for that. So I think being engaged in that process and helping us to kind of understand those issues, because I think that's really a way that we could look at that. As I mentioned, there is the goal that hopefully there will be more funds available. I don't quite have the experience of the transportation department going to the legislature and saying, hey, I need $100 million for this project, and they just give it to me because it's on this list, right? So the goal,
The
so that.
Senate does that all the time.
Yeah, that's what I want for water, right? That's what I want for water.
Yeah.
And my understanding from Representative Snyder, again, grant funds available for projects aren't paid back to the state. We just see that that's an investment in our transportation system, where most of our water projects, as you mentioned, are done on loans, which all of it's paid back by the user. So we're trying to balance those things, but the goal is, my understanding from Representative Snyder, to have more grant funds available, which should help as well.
Are you building additional funds? Because again, I look at this and I go, okay, so every single loan is paid back to water resources. Some of them are 0%, some are 1%. They're not high at all, but it seems like that should be building a fund, like a college, what's it called? They have
Endowment.
What?
An endowment.
Endowment, yeah, it's like an endowment, you know, I mean, it keeps growing. The more people borrow money, the more money that goes into it. Unless you increase significantly the cost of operation, it should be building a pretty big fund in there that we can continue to reuse that money over and over and over again. Is that happening?
So for the Board of Water Resources, yes,
Okay.
because we don't do a lot of grants. We did grants with ARPA funds and those type of things, but because we don't do grants in most cases, all of that money is revolving, right? And invested in all of those type of things. So we are building additional funds there. We still get sales tax money, so those are growing. I would say with this last couple of years of ARPA funds that were available for secondary metering, we saw, because those grant funds are available, they still have a 30% cost share. We saw a significant number of entities coming to us and saying, yes, we want this grant and we want a loan. So there was like another almost 60, if I'm remembering correctly, $1 million of loans within the last couple of years that the Board of Water Resources did to help support those. But because we had those funds available, the board was able to do that. And those are all going to get paid back. So that's kind of the overarching picture there.
That's great. And I see you saving a tremendous amount of water and being able to use additional water in areas where in the past it's been wasted.
Mm-hmm.
If you meter it and you charge for it, the use of water will go down, and that's just fact, you know. Mm-hmm. We've got people finding out here, we're putting in these meters, and whose line is this? Oh, that's going over to this person, and they've never paid a penny for water to the company for like 20 years.
Oh, boy.
I just thought that came with property, you know, that line's going over there, so I've been using it. It's pretty interesting. You got some of those over there. By the way, I want to mention one thing. I've got my board chairman here, Ben Clarkson, and also Dirk Clayson. He works for the Water District, former county commissioner, and I'd like to recognize him today. He's part of hosting you guys here, so that's pretty powerful bunch of people here, Ben. When you file a change application, you better get it right, buddy.
Coming out.
Thank you. Thank you. Thanks for having us.
Yeah.
All right, thank you, Candice. Any other comments, questions for Candice? I don't see any hands up. Okay, great. Next is the discussion of the integration of the Great Salt Lake Advisory Council with the Watershed Councils. And Tim is going to present. Oh, he's up there. Very good. There's Tim. Welcome, Tim.
Hey, everybody. It's great to be with you. I wish I was with you down there in Mike Noel country. But on a positive note, I'm not putting a strain on the local water infrastructure.
If I'd known you were on there, I wouldn't have made any bad comments about the Great Salt Lake. No.
All right, so I'm gonna try to screen
How you
share.
doing?
Let me see here. I didn't even hear Mike's joke, but that's probably a good thing.
Yeah.
I just talked about dumping water in the Great Salt Lake and what the farmers thought about it, okay? So you probably can figure it out.
Okay. All right. Well, anyway, it's great to be with you. I'll talk a little bit about the Great Salt Lake Advisory Council and then this Watershed Council framework that you all are fairly familiar with. I just had a few. I know most everybody that's on the call, but just so you know, I work full time in the brine shrimp industry. It's an industry, interesting industry, not a really big one, but it has a remarkable global footprint, and I think something that's not appreciated very much in the state is just how much brine shrimp from the Great Salt Lake really touch the world. We export to 55 different countries around the world, and it plays an essential role in the production of more than 5 million metric tons of shrimp and fish production. So it's kind of an interesting way that the Great Salt Lake really touches the world. I also am a senior advisor in the College of Science at the University of Utah. I served in the House of Representatives for 8 years. Mike Noel and I, Representative Noel and I, played the tag team there with the Rules Committee. And it's hard for me to say this, it's hard for me to realize, but it's been now over 20 years now that I've been working on water law and policy and more than 8 years on Great Salt Lake. But most relevant to this discussion, wear a couple of hats that I think are important. One is I chair the Great Salt Lake Advisory Council, and I was the primary bill sponsor on 166, the Watershed Councils Act, back in 2020. So let me just tell the group, I don't know if somebody can mute, I'm getting a lot of feedback, but I wanted to just ground everybody a little bit in the Great Salt Lake Advisory Council and what it does. It's been around since 2010, and its statutory mandate is to report to the governor, the legislature, Department of Natural Resources, and now the commissioner of the Great Salt Lake. And historically, what it's done is it's prepared a lot of studies related to the lake, so studies about economic value, lake health, different things like that. Since 2017, the council directs $125,000 per year from out of the brine shrimp royalty to sort of reports and research, the kind of studies that I was just talking about. Important to point out that, like most watershed councils, the Great Salt Lake Advisory Council doesn't have any legal authority. Can't tell anybody to do anything. But what it does is it serves as a forum for people and organizations who are interested in the lake to basically come together and discuss those issues. We meet every other month, and it's interesting because when I first started going to these meetings 8 years ago, you know, you'd have maybe 10, 12 people around the table. You could fit in a pretty small conference room. This day and age, we routinely, between in-person and online, draw 50 to 80 people per meeting, and that's because of just the profile that Great Salt Lake has got over time. So if you look at the membership, it's this is how the membership is set up, again, by statute, and it was the statute in 2010. And all of these people are appointed to 4-year terms by the governor and then go through Senate confirmation. But you can see the interests represented. And basically the way to look at the makeup is it was people that were interested in the lake back in 2010 when nobody was really interested in the lake. But the industry that I'm a part of, the mineral extraction companies, birds, migratory birds and things like that. And then what we'd have is a lot of the publicly owned treatment works. And then we have a lot of different government representatives, including one representative of each of the counties that touch Great Salt Lake. And you can see who's down there. Some of you may recognize former Representative Lee Perry, for example, is on there. Ben Dodalski, who used to be with Wildlife Resources, and others. So that's the current membership of the council. So then I don't need to tell this group about the Watershed Council Act, but I think there's a couple of key understandings that are worth just pointing out. One of the primary purpose, and this is stated in the act, is to develop a diverse and balanced stakeholder forums to discuss water policy and resource issues at both the local, the watershed issues, and then at the state level. One of the background assumptions, and I know this because I lived it, but one of the background principles that informed this act was, first, don't do any harm. Let's not disrupt the work of existing and effective watershed councils. The idea is to be additive rather than competitive, so it wasn't to supplant anything. And where we had watersheds working, we wanted to keep those watershed councils working and functioning just as they had before. There was also a recognition that was important. Warren, I worked heavily with Warren on this piece of legislation, but there was also an important assumption regarding Great Salt Lake, and that's that Great Salt Lake has unique importance for the future of the state of Utah, and so we need to make sure that that resource is protected. Second, it's kind of different in that it requires coordination. You can't just assign it to one of these councils. You have 5 different watershed councils that sit within the watershed of the Great Salt Lake. And so how do we figure out how to coordinate between them? So those were some background assumptions that we were thinking about when we developed the legislation. I will tell you one thing that we didn't actually think about, right up to fog of war, late at the session, whatever it might be. But what we didn't potentially consider is the potential disruption or the possibility of conflicting mandates or duplication of efforts between the Great Salt Lake Advisory Council, which really functions as a watershed council, and this potential new Great Salt Lake Watershed Council. Just didn't think about that. So, the one thing that became clear to me, and this really became clear as I sort of assumed more of a role in the Great Salt Lake Advisory Council, is again, it just didn't make sense to have 2 of these operating in the same space. I mean, they both have basically the same mandate, basically the same ideas to bring stakeholders together. Do you have just 2 sets of meetings going on? What if their ideas conflict? It's really could potentially be quite disruptive and confusing for people. And so we said, well, we should resolve this tension. And the first idea was just to say, well, look, Great Salt Lake Advisory Council has been going for almost 15 years now. Let's just designate it as the Great Salt Lake Watershed Council, leave its membership as is. Watershed councils are perfectly fine to come in and coordinate with Great Salt Lake Advisory Council. Everything should work fine. But we got objections from some of these. Well, number one, there was an expectation in these various constituent watershed councils. They had nominated representatives to go to a not yet formed Great Salt Lake Watershed Council. They had an expectation that they would have representation there. The other thing is that again, Great Salt Lake Advisory Council was sort of developed with the needs of 2010 in mind. If we were developing it today, we would probably have a different membership. So there's a little bit of tension and question whether that Great Salt Lake Advisory Council membership is adequate. And then part of the problem is, so what if you were to blend them, if you're trying to mesh them together, we'd go from 11-person council appointed by advice and consent to kind of this mixed council with more than 20 members potentially, which also was problematic. So we didn't go down that. This was last session. There was a notion to maybe, just try to do an easy, quick fix. It didn't really work, and so it was abandoned. What we've done in lieu of that is a de facto combination of these 2 concepts. And that's what we're doing right now. And that's that Great Salt Lake Advisory Council issued formal invitations to the constituent watershed councils and other interested parties, people that are really working on the lake, to come and participate in the council as liaisons. And so today in our meetings, and this is true for about the last 3 or 4 meetings, you can see on the left-hand column there's all the council members, right? The ones that I laid out before. And then in addition to that, we've invited these liaisons, the Bear River Watershed Council, the Weber, the Jordan, Utah Lake West Desert. We've also invited a representative from the agriculture community. Warren is currently serving in that capacity. Native American tribes, the U.S. military, which has its test and training range in Hill Air Force Base right there. And also the BLM, because there's a lot of BLM land around Utah and various programs from the BLM as well.
Sorry, Tim, I don't think we're seeing your changing slides over here, if you've been switching, or are you just still on the membership slide?
I'm on current composition, so is it, you not seeing that?
No.
He needs to hit the play slideshow.
I think he did that. It was stuck on the membership.
It's just not reading it, I think. Well, all you're missing out, folks, is words. So I don't think it'd be great if you have it, but if you can't see it, it's no big deal. But bottom line is we now have kind of a hybrid council made up of formally statutorily appointed council members and then these liaisons. The ones that I just described. So we've added nine liaisons to the existing membership of the Great Salt Lake Advisory Council. And let me just sort of say, how is it going? Well, it's working pretty well. We've got good participation from both council members, which we've had historically, and the liaisons. We haven't had the train go off the rails or any major disagreements. The members and the liaisons, very much like the water task force, they sit together at one table, and then we kind of have the public off on one side, and the public participates and can participate as well. Every liaison, they have a name card just like the council members do. I'm concerned, and I think others are concerned, that if we tried to do a legislative fix this session, it would largely just devolve into debates about who's in and who's out, who has a vote and who doesn't. This is for a group that doesn't take, I don't think we've ever had a divided vote probably in the history of Great Salt Lake Advisory Council. But the moment you start talking about that, then people start to worry about whether they're adequately represented. So there's a rough consensus to say, let's just keep this as is through this next year to see how it goes, continues to go, increase everybody's comfort level all around. I'd point out that the statute that creates the Watershed Council, and specifically that allows for the creation of a Great Salt Lake Watershed Council, is permissive as far as that Great Salt Lake Watershed Council. It says if it's formed, if it's certified. So there's not some fundamental statutory conflict that has to be resolved as a result. So I think as we look long-term, there's probably, an opportunity maybe to mesh these two and to think about what that might look like. But I think right now, just as a practical matter, there's not a need to act precipitously in a way that could kick up a lot of dust. And we can just continue to sort of let this play out and see how it's going. It's going fairly well. And then at some point in time, I think we can resolve the statutory. It's not a conflict, not an overt conflict, but there's a little bit of statutory tension there. And we can probably do that in 2026 or beyond, just kind of see how it goes. But it's working quite well. Happy to take any questions or comments. Warren probably has a perspective to add here because, again, Warren was pretty key. We worked together in developing the Watershed Council legislation in the first instance.
Thank you, Tim. Very good presentation. And I, for one, feel like the hybrid makes a lot of sense. But yeah, I think your proposal to try this for a year and see how things go. We've got a couple of questions. We got one from Sterling first, and then from Warren.
Feels good to trump Warren. Tim, Sterling here. It's still unclear to me. It's still unclear to me, Tim, the connection that your 14-year council has with the new Utah Watershed Council? And number two, what connection that your group has with the new Salt Lake Commissioner, if any? Will you walk me through both of those?
Yes, Sterling, great question. I'll start with the second one first. So statutorily, when the commissioner's office was created, so historically, Great Salt Lake Advisory Council, one of their principal duties is to advise or report on, you know, kind of the Great Salt Lake and management issues around the Great Salt Lake to the governor, to DNR, to the legislature. And when the commissioner's office was formed, it was actually said that we would report, we would advise the commissioner as well. Now, we don't do a lot of advising of the commissioner, but we do have the commissioner's office come to each one of our meetings, and we sort of do a report back and a Q&A and things like that. So what we're really trying to do is coordinate with the commissioner's office, and there is a statutory obligation to do that. So in terms of how they fit, so Great Salt Lake Advisory Council doesn't fit, at least from a conceptual standpoint, doesn't fit in the Watershed Council framework. In other words, it doesn't talk about the Great Salt Lake Advisory Council in that. But the reality is the way that it functions, Great Salt Lake, since 2010, the Great Salt Lake Advisory Council has functioned as the Watershed Council for the Great Salt Lake. So now for almost, and when people think about Great Salt Lake that are in here and around it, they think about, where do I go to raise issues? Where do I go to have conversations about Great Salt Lake? They come to the Great Salt Lake Advisory Council. And so what we try to do with this blended idea, just like Scott was alluding to, is we've now invited those Watershed Council members to come and participate as liaisons. Again, that's not a statutory thing, but it's definitely honoring the spirit of Watershed Councils, which is, let's bring the stakeholders together. Let's create a forum to share ideas. And what we've been doing at the Great Salt Lake Advisory Council is we've been having 2 of those liaisons per meeting sort of do an in-depth dive into, here's what's going on in the Utah Lake watershed, or here's what's going on in the Bear River watershed, or for the Native American representative, here's why we're concerned about Great Salt Lake, and here's what we're trying to do that's constructive and helpful. So that's just a flavor of what we're trying to do, and hopefully that answers your question.
Tim, then the Great Salt Lake Council has a direct link to the commissioner and the governor's office. As
Yes.
does the legislation, the watershed legislation, of course, has that advisory link. So we've got 2 links to those powers, correct?
Yes, but I don't see them as in conflict. I see them as complementary. I mean, they work fine that way. I mean, one question that we can ask is, should a representative from, as is contemplated in the Watershed Council legislation, should we have a representative from the Great Salt Lake Advisory Council, say, attend the statewide Watershed Council meeting? And that's an open question. But that's also something we can do informally without the need for a legislative fix.
Mm-hmm. Okay, Warren, and then we've got Mike after that. Go ahead, Warren.
Thank you, Scott. Tim, I do have a couple of questions, but to your point, Tim, we didn't, as we put together the Watershed Council Act, I think we just weren't well enough aware of the Great Salt Lake Advisory Committee and what its functions are. And it's been, so there's just a 10-year gap there between creation of Great Salt Lake Advisory Council and the creation of the Watershed Councils, 2010 and 2020 bills. So now we've got the choice of either butting heads or integrating and making it so that the one group can accomplish the objectives from both perspectives. And frankly, we have a pretty good model for doing that, because the Jordan River Commission has done just that, with compliments to what Soren and others have done there to make this work. So one of the questions I had is, we do kind of, the purpose of the liaisons in part is to create that diversity of stakeholders, or broaden the diversity of stakeholder participation, that the Watershed Council Act contemplates as compared to the Great Salt Lake Council. Is that a fair interpretation of what you said?
No, I think that's a fair interpretation, Warren. And that's how it's working in practice, just that way.
Yeah. The one thing I would note is in the Watershed Council Act, the federal agencies do participate as liaisons, but not as voting members, and that's how you would probably contemplate them doing in the what should we call it, the integrated model of the Great Salt Lake Advisory Council. They'd continue in that advisory role, but not as a voting member, for instance.
Yeah, I don't want to presume that exact solution, but it makes a lot of sense, Warren, in this context for the reason it made sense in that context.
Yeah, sure. And the other, Mr. Chair, the last comment I have on this is that part of what we had in mind in voting on creating a legislative subcommittee in our last meeting of the State Watersheds Council was to have that group work with the other interests and see to what degree the statutes need to be integrated. So I like the idea of leaving the question open for the next year while we work jointly to do that. So I think it's a good approach that you've described, and I would suggest that we're already working in that direction. Let's keep going. So, Mr. Chair, those are my comments. Thank you.
Thank you, Warren. Go ahead, Mike.
So, Tim, what I said before is that we talked to it, the last session, we had this metering program to try to save water in rural Utah and all these other areas, which we did here. We're actually meets right in the middle of replacing all these meters and connections with digital reading that actually reads 365 days a year. They're at a tower, so we know exactly how much water they use. But when David Hinkins, our friend, said, well, we're not going to try to save our water if you dump it in the Great Salt Lake, that kind of went away as far as that part of it. But here's a question I have, Tim. You gave the numbers on the brine shrimp, and I toured the whole facility. I think it's wonderful. I know that it's needed for food across the world, and it's for farming, it's great. I mean, to me, it's crazy. You got these little tiny tuna fish cans that go shipped all around the world, and that's what keeps the whole program going, it's cool. It's great. But how much water are we losing in the Great Salt Lake every year? And like a rough acre feet, how many acre feet of water? Is that because it's not flowing in, or is that because we're not getting the right weather, or what? And just how much water is that?
I mean, the lake evaporates an enormous amount. It's incredibly, flat, shallow lake. I don't know exact numbers, but it's on the order of, I think it's on the order of 200,000. Am I using the right numbers? No, it's 2 million. Yeah, it's a lot.
So that was the number that I wanted you to get, because to me, if this keeps on like this, 2.5 million acre feet of water, there's no way we could do that. We can't provide it because the water, if it's going down there, it's going down everywhere. I'm just going to give you an example. Washington County right now, 1 acre foot of water is cost, the wholesale cost of that is $40,000 an acre foot. $40,000 for 1 acre foot. You're talking about 45 million, multiply that times 40,000 down here. And I know it's less, but if we grow in one of the fastest growing states in the nation, at some point in the future, something's going to happen. And that water, and I mean, I know you're trying to do it, but tell me what your long-term deal is on this. How much water can we dump in the Great Salt Lake that could grow crops, that could provide business, that could promote residential growth, all those things? How much water can we afford to put in the lake? And I'm not trying to be contentious. I'm just saying, reality is, I don't know how long we can do this.
So Mike, it's a great question, and most of the folks on this call have probably heard me evangelize on this enough, and we could go on a long time, but the reality is for Northern Utah, failure when it comes to Great Salt Lake is not an option. If you look around the world at terminal lakes that have been lost, the economic, human health, and other causes, the other harms that happen are catastrophic. I'm not exaggerating. This is crazy. I'm happy to share any of this information if you see it. The costs are in the billions of dollars. Devastation to local economies and things like that. So failure is not an option. Now, the good news is it's not like we have to come up with 2.5 million acre feet per year, because what we're talking about is the delta between having a healthy and sustainable lake or just being on a downward trajectory or on an upward trajectory. That delta gets smaller, right? So I just got out of the Great Salt Lake strike team numbers. They say, listen, 250,000 acre feet additional per year, which is doable. It's hard, it's a heavy lift, but it's doable if everybody works together. Suddenly the chances of the lake staying in a healthier range, right, are much, much greater. And if you can add to that, then even better, even more likely that that lake stays in healthy ranges, and we have the water that we need for growth and for other uses. But we have to get a whole lot smarter about the way we use water, and quite frankly, without adopting some of the very aggressive conservation measures that are being adopted in Washington County and doing the same in northern Utah, it's hard to see again how we can sustain the lake and continue to grow and preserve agriculture at the same time. So if we want to meet all those uses, beneficial uses, and I think we have to get a lot smarter about the way we use water.
That's the issue with the lake dries up and the winds blow and there's all kinds of toxic material, and so it's a health issue. Is that what you're talking about?
I'd say that's the primary driver, Mike, that most people think about, but it's tied to our snowpack, right? It's 5 to 10% of the snow and the precipitation that falls along the Wasatch Front. You take the lake away, you lose 5 to 10%. The dust makes your snowpack melt faster. That's not sustainable. That's bad for ag. That's bad for people that want to live there. I mean, it's bad for everybody. So it's a whole, the more we study the lake, the more we learn the way that the lake is really, it moderates temperature. It's tied to a lot of different things. And that's why we can't afford to get it wrong. The good news is we haven't lost the lake, and there are ways to save it. That's what we're working on. Working hard on all that stuff.
Thanks, Tim. Appreciate it.
Yeah, thanks, Mike. Good to hear from you.
Thank you, Mike. Let's see, Soren first and then Mark's back. Yeah, come on up.
I'll share space with Sterling here. Sure.
While we're talking legislation, we'll forego having a state crustacean as a Jordan River crawdad. And I think we should have the brine shrimp. So we got a lot of state things, and maybe that's one we should think about. Now, tongue in cheek aside, I really appreciate Tim's work on, looking at how the Great Salt Lake Advisory Council could fit this need. I just learned at the Advisory Council meeting last week that they were formed the same year that the River Commission was in 2010. Kind of coincidental, but we figured out a way to use the structure of the Jordan River Commission to fit and become certified as the Watershed Council for the Jordan River. And so we've got a model, and that might work where we appoint our members differently than the governor and a consent process that the Advisory Council works in, the space they work in. But we love that they've now incorporated the Jordan River Watershed Council into that working group. And we know there's a really important link. Some other things that we may want to think about, since I'm sitting next to Sterling, there is a link of the Jordan River to the Utah Lake as well. And we don't have a seat on the Utah Lake Watershed Council in the same way that we do. Utah Lake has a seat on the Great Salt Lake Council. So as we're thinking about, potential legislative changes to the council's act, that might be something to contemplate, whether or not those really directly connected watershed councils should have, some reciprocal role. we do have representation of Utah Lake, although it's via the Utah Lake Authority serving on our board and watershed council. So that's a couple of legislative, or at least, a big potential legislative item to think about. One other that we've talked about in our watershed council, of those, I think 11 or 12 interest areas, we don't have recreation represented. And I know Mike's talked about the real impact of tourists and recreation in their watershed and water use. That is a major use and function of the Jordan River right now, from fishing and boating and all kinds of recreation activities. And so if there were some accommodation that we could make to add recreation as one of those water interests, that's something we would certainly advocate for as we're contemplating potential changes. So I just thought I'd bring those up. Recreation on pretty much all the water bodies and all the watersheds around the state is really important as well. So I just thought I'd add that to the conversation. Thanks.
Good comments. Thank you. I appreciate that. Mark?
Yep. Yeah, just real briefly. So I support this idea of continuing with this kind of, I don't know if you call it an experiment, but this method of trying to work through how the Great Salt Lake works between a formal council and between what's going on right now with the Great Salt Lake Advisory Council, with the liaison people. I think that that's a great way to try to take a little bit of a baby step without launching into a complete statutory review, not knowing that if we try something different right now, whether it would work any better or not. And so I very much support that. As far as the overall discussion of the lake, maybe that's something we talk about in a future agenda item. We could go on for a long time. As the representative for League of Cities and Towns, I will say that certainly cities and towns are concerned about future growth and what changes the lake might do there. But that's as much as I need to say right now, probably on that.
Okay. Thank you, Mark. Appreciate that. Let's see any hands. Yes, Rick.
A quick question for Tim. Do the county commissioners on that board participate much, and what is their involvement? One question, one idea would be to potentially have them off, because they could be participating in the local watershed and have those local watersheds fill some of those spots, so you're not a surplus of 6 or 7 more people, it's only 3 or 4.
Tim, you're on mute. If you were to try to answer.
Trouble turning it off. Okay, can you hear me now? It's a okay, now you can hear me?
Yeah.
It's a Verizon. And it's a good question, and it suggests itself, right? It seems like an obvious thing, because the original GSLAC was and it remains heavy on that county representation. But it is one of those things where nobody really cares about something until you take it away. Which county are you going to kick off, right? And so we've always wanted to be additive rather than try to be, subtractive in that sense. I'd rather have more people in a big, more awkward council than try to say, I don't know, have it be rotating or something. The county participation is definitely mixed, and it depends on the personality. But I will say that at various times we've had good participation from every county. Sometimes Box Elder's been really active. Sometimes Weber's been. Davis has consistently been active, probably because its proximity to the lake. Salt Lake's been consistently participant. Tooele's been in and out. But we've had pretty good participation from them. We did contemplate that, but I think, again, I'd rather have like a bigger tent probably than trying to shrink it and vote people off the island, if that makes sense.
Yes, it does.
Get the appropriations, right? They have funding versus most watersheds do not have watershed councils.
Yeah, and GSLAC doesn't have any statutory funding either. It doesn't. And shrimp royalty, but again, that's for projects, for research, for studies and things like that. And its staff support is provided by agencies, but it doesn't direct any state money.
Okay, any other comments? Questions? Great. All right, thank you, Tim, appreciate that. So
Thanks,
I
Scott.
think the
Thanks,
consensus is that we'll.
everybody. I got to hop on. Appreciate it.
Thanks, Tim, appreciate it. So is the consensus that we continue to operate the Great Salt Lake Advisory Council as the Watershed Council? And in this hybrid scenario? Is everybody?
I would just suggest maybe our consensus is that we don't need to worry about trying to organize Great Salt Lake Watershed Council right now. And that we just defer that until we get a little bit more information. So not that it is the council, just that we're not organizing, or, because that's all we can do is approve.
That sounds like a motion.
Yeah. You can make something out of that.
We have a second.
Second.
Second from Sterling. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed?
Aye.
That was Lauren and Laura.
They may want to clarify if
They're
they're.
high on the original motion.
Yes.
Not on opposition.
Okay, just a little slow.
Warren was against it.
Yeah.
Okay. Way to go, Lauren. You split up the whole thing.
Oh, no, I was in
Thank you,
favor.
thank you.
And by the way, Tim owes Laura $10.
I was gonna say that.
All right, thank you. Motion carries. Very good. We got that solved for at least this short term. Okay, on to the next item. So we've got a discussion on the upcoming legislative session. So we'll turn the time over to Teresa. Some of her issues.
Okay, I wasn't sure if there was another, because I'm butting in on this item, I think.
Let's hear from you first, either way.
Okay, so there are 5 bills that I just wanted to bring to the attention of the committee. The first one is House Bill 41, and it is titled the State Water Policy Amendments. And I want to point out that there's a substitute to that bill that I think got released today. But over the weekend, I worked with Representative Albrecht to make some modifications to House Bill 41. And essentially what it's just doing a couple of items to add some things to the state water policy. One of them, there is a section that says the study and consideration of mechanisms for increased flexibility in water use, such as water banking and split season uses. I asked to have saved water also added to that because it's now defined in statute. Another section of that was brought forward by Representative Chu out of the Vernal area. And he wanted to have monitoring of activities in watersheds that provide water for drinking water systems to protect the watersheds. He has a situation out in Ashley area where the county approved a climbing wall that's right at the Vernal City's drinking water sources. So he added this over the weekend. He also asked for that consultation, that monitoring to be ironically in consultation to the watershed councils here. That is defined in the Watershed Councils Act, which I think is a good amendment. There were a couple of lines that had been stricken in the previous original bill that dealt with infrastructure and Great Salt Lake, Utah Lake, considering social, economic, and environmental needs. And that was taken out by someone from a representative from Tooele, and Representative Albrecht asked to have that brought back because it was part of the original water policy, and maybe it needs some further discussion. One of the concerns that I had was removing economic from those considerations, because that may be something that is very valuable to consider economic there. it also deals with the state water plan. There's a section there, and then also reuse where, with appropriate conditions for the region where reuse occurs. So I think that the substitute addresses some of the concerns that the Water Task Force had last week, when this bill was brought before them. Watch for that, and definitely help Representative Albrecht with that one. The next one is House Bill 46. And this is one that I asked for a policy consideration of the legislature, and it's being ran by Representative Doug Owens. And it's titled Water Rights Application Amendments. Through the water right process, applications can lapse. And there's a mechanism where the applicant can request the state engineer to reinstate that application if it meets certain criteria. What we found is that the time period for the applicant to reply was the same time period that the state engineer had to respond. And that makes it very difficult, because if an applicant doesn't file till 11:59 p.m., then I have to be watching and at midnight make a decision. And so it didn't quite work. So what we're trying to do is just fix that language to be very clear when an applicant needs to reply or submit a request, and then that the state engineer has time to act after that, and that there will be a specific form provided. So it's really, I know it's the geek part of water law that I love, but it's just really clarifying the water right process with that bill. And there will be a substitute, so don't worry when you see that. In the original bill for HB 46, it says restate application, and it needs to be reinstatement application, so it's adding that in. The next one is House Bill 47, and this is also Representative Albrecht. This is called Public Lands Watering Rights Amendments, and it addresses livestock watering rights on public lands. This is one that I also asked the legislature for policy clarification and direction on. And essentially, there's a couple items that it does. There was existing language that was in statute, which Representative Noel brought about. And it established what was called a livestock watering certificate. We issued about 600, almost 700 of those, but only 34 of them were filed by grazers. The remainder were filed by public agencies. None had been filed since 2015. All of them are expired, and it just seemed that cleaning up the statute really would help eliminate something that just wasn't quite working. It also directs, there's a section in here. The previous language said that the state engineer would hold in trust the water rights if a federal agency reduced the AUMs on an allotment. There really was no mechanism for me to hold a water right in trust. And so what the language now does say is that the grazer can file a non-use application for that difference, which will help protect that from forfeiture. It also adds a very lengthy section, giving me direction on how to evaluate these public water reserve 107s when they are filed. And a lot of this is based on some research and even decisions of state engineers in other states, such as Nevada and Wyoming, which will narrow how these can be filed, including that the grazer need to be filed with consent of the grazer, so that the beneficial use is tied to the person claiming that. So that is a bill that, again, Representative Albrecht, thank you to him for doing that. The next one is House Bill 174, and this is the water rights restricted account. Again, Representative Albrecht, I think he's going to hate me after this year, but He's so willing, and easy to work with. He's great. So, this one really deals with some, funding mechanisms that I have in the Division of Water Rights. Right now, I can, use some money from my water right restricted account to, obtain legal counsel. And, I have the AG's office, and they support us in our adjudication efforts, and that funding is limited to areas where there are adjudications. What this bill is looking to do is allow me to use the funds, for areas outside of adjudications as well. For example, Sevier River, Beaver, Milford areas, other areas where Weaver River, Green River area, on the very north of the state, where adjudications have been completed. But this is kind of a proactive ask on my part. If I get public water reserves filed on the Sevier River system, for some reason, I wouldn't have any dollars to help pay for some legal reviews of that. And so it's just kind of broadening that. So that's the water right restricted account use there. And then the last one is Senate Bill 33. And this is water rights recording amendments. And this is Senator Vickers that has this bill. This was brought forward, and it's a policy consideration, again, that I asked the legislature for. And it was brought forward by some of his constituents that do water rights title. And currently the addenda form that we use requires the grantee to sign a wet signature. It's the last wet signature that's required by statute in my agency. So what this bill does is it allows for the grantor to sign by electronic signature, and that those will still be recorded, but they can sign electronically. And that helps us just get that last piece so that we can accept electronic signatures on all everything in our office, which will just speed the process. There was another a kind of concern that was brought up by his constituents as well, that dealt with affidavits of survivorship, but it became a little too complicated to include this year. So I'm hoping over next interim we can address that. But this bill is pretty straightforward with that electronic signature. So those are just 5 that I wanted to bring to the awareness of the councils and, all of your other councils. If there's any concerns or questions on that language, please just feel free to reach out to me directly. But these are 5 that definitely are helpful for the Division of Water Rights in my agency.
Great. Good discussion. Thanks, Teresa. Got a comment from Tammy.
I know that there's, Snyder's got another one on optimization. Does that come under your wheelhouse?
So
I don't have any of the details of it. I just know that he's got a bill file on it.
Kelly's over there. I think what it might be doing, and I'm not positive, I know that the Ag Optimization Committee had made a recommendation on metering and measurement to allow for a 75% pay on a loan. And I don't know if there was anything else beyond that, but I think that, do you know if that's it, Kelly?
Set up to 75% on drip irrigation and surge.
And measurement and telemetry. Yeah, I think that's all it's doing, but we can definitely, do you know, Kelly, is that?
I just know that's in it, but I haven't seen the actual bill to see if there's more. And I don't think it's numbered yet, by the way, I just checked.
Okay.
What is the number on it?
It hasn't
It's
come
not-
out yet. I haven't seen it.
Yeah, I haven't heard anything beyond the 75, up to 75%.
Mike.
I was just gonna ask Teresa, I want to make sure I understand this. This is under Public Law 107, is that what so all I remember from 30 years ago is that they were getting rid of all those. They were going through and eliminating all those public water reserves. Now, you told me that they're adding more, correct? I don't understand what, I mean, I have a feeling it's something nefarious, but maybe you can explain to me why they're now going out, the BLM is going out and filing all these public water reserves.
Yeah, so I don't know, why the BLM is. I do know that, last summer, they filed, about 4 dozen public water reserves in the Moab area.
Okay.
9 of them, for example, were filed in Grandstaff Canyon, which is close to grazing. And so I need to evaluate those, and I've just been told by the BLM that they are looking to file more. So I don't know necessarily where that direction is coming from, but I need to have direction from the legislature
Just
on
saying.
policy for that.
Well, the reason I'm concerned is because, and this is something that goes way back to when I ran that first bill, it's a mechanism for the federal government to take usurp authority from the state of Utah that owns the water rights. When the state was created, all the water rights belong to the people except for these water reserves. But our law says they have to be put to beneficial use. And most of these have never been put to beneficial use. It was like, oh, you're going along the wagon train. There's a spring here that you could stop and fill up your canteens or your water bucket. But that hasn't been done for, 50, 60, 100 years. So I'm trying to figure out, when you said Moab, anything coming out of Moab would be very good. Just like those guys figure out ways to go around everything. They start filing all these public water rights. That's concerning. We should have some state policy. What's the beneficial use? That's what I want to know.
Yeah, and I, like I said, I don't know, necessarily what the BLM is thinking. Just when they get filed with our office, how do we, with the Division of Water Rights, how do I evaluate those?
It'll be something in the future that you'll want to build a road or put a line in, or they'll say you can't go in there because that's a public water reserve. You can't go near that. You're going to impact the watershed. You're going to impact the quality of the water. It'll be another layer of bureaucracy on top of it, along with everything else they do. So, well, I'll tell you this, we ought to get on top of it, not allow them to do that. So.
Yeah, and I would definitely just encourage you to reach out to Representative Albrecht, and express the concerns that you have there. And if you support what, he's doing with his bill. I know Tammy has talked with him.
Yeah, get with him.
We have, yeah.
Go ahead, Warren.
Thank you. I just wanted to offer to the gentleman from the Kane County Water Conservancy District that if he wants to call, I'd be glad to walk him line by line through the bill so you can see what our thinking is and how to make sure we tie it back to the past efforts so that we're not undoing something that we'd rather not undo. So, Mike, give me a call.
Okay, good.
I agree with Warren, and I agree with Mike. I'm really nervous about this, because it seems like they're throwing up roadblocks on what happens in the future for Utah, so clarify to me what the difference is between the water reserve and what your bill was clear back in, wasn't it 2012 or was it 14, that says that they can no longer file for new rights, the federal government.
No, that was, the whole purpose of that was we were limited. This is under a different administration, a whole different, you clear back to the 1970s and 80s. And we were going to the title class and we were identifying ours 2477 roads, filing those. We were going through and getting rid of the water, all of those encumbrances on the land that were bureaucratic or getting rid of them. All of a sudden they come back and none of the RS 2477s were approved. They went backwards on that and said, no, those aren't roads, you got to get a Title 5 right away. It's in that same theme that started to happen back then under Bill Clinton. So that's what happened really.
And maybe just to clarify, so the previous, to add clarification, that you had the background with at that time, the previous language in 73-330 really dealt with state-based water rights, like diligence claims, applications to appropriate changes on existing rights, that they needed to have the beneficial user's consent to file a change. So it really dealt with the state-based. With these public water reserves, they're based on a federal reservation that was done in 1926 by Calvin Coolidge. So you have kind of a state-based water right authorities here, and then you have this Federal Reserve Water Right Authority that kind of runs simultaneously. Those are brought together in the general stream adjudications to where rights can be brought together and evaluated in one place. And so what hopefully they'll all be filed in that general adjudication space so that we can bring them together. But just in case they're not, because I just don't know where they're going to be filed, that is the kind of the ask for the restricted fund to be able to, so I have some funding so I can address them.
Got it.
So.
Thank you for following up on that.
Thanks, Teresa. Got a comment from Sarah.
I think this has been a very good discussion, and I think that Warren and his team have done a really good job of trying to provide some sideboards on how the state engineer ought to evaluate public water reserve 107 claims. One thing I was going to mention is back in 2007 in Arizona, through some miracle, I don't know what, part of the public water reserve 107 was retracted for a specific area in Arizona. So that is another, but that would be a federal action. That is a potential other avenue to think about.
We could request that.
So just so that, you know, so Reg Johnson is aware, and it's on a list, yes.
Okay, thank you.
Great. Thank you, thank you. Candice, any other legislation?
Yes, so there are a couple of different pieces of legislation. One that I mentioned in the existing fund study to cover those recommendations that Representative Snyder is running. It is not numbered yet. I'm anticipating it'll be numbered shortly. The other one that I wanted to mention, which is also not numbered yet, but I think we have 24 more hours on that one, is based on the water infrastructure funding study that we completed at the end of October, November of last year. And that one that study looks specific, and I could give a whole other presentation on that, but I'll try to shrink it down. That study looked at property taxes and the role of property taxes in funding water infrastructure. The recommendations came out that we should not change or eliminate property taxes, that and that there were some areas that could improve how we define what reasonable water rates. It sounds like there may have been some differences of opinion on, does reasonable water rates mean water rates that are as affordable as possible, as cheap as possible, or does it mean something, you know, else? And so how does conservation play a role into that? So there will be a bill that kind of will be looking at including conservation as an element when considering reasonable water rates. And then there was also recommendation to have tiered water rates for drinking water and secondary. So that could also be a component of the bill.
Isn't that also Snyder?
It is Snyder. He did ask, I think it was the Legislative Water Development Commission meeting. I presented this at a number of committees and things too. He asked, well, how do you do that statewide? And we told him that water is hyper-local and you can't do one rate that would fit for the whole state in one kind of legislative bill, but there are potential best management practices in setting tiered water rates that could be useful. So something along those lines will be coming out as well.
We should just tie it to, it costs less than your Netflix account, you should be okay. They don't seem to care how big the Netflix or all those other accounts. And you turn the water off, you get a lot of calls.
Oh yeah, you do.
Okay, any other legislative updates? What to bring up here? Go ahead, Warren. All right.
Back again, sorry. A couple of bills that you might would affect people here. I think one of them is the Senator Sandals bill imposing a drinking water fee that one requires tiered levels in water rates. So that may be where the tiered section went into, the tiered fee structure went into Senator Sandals' bill, which is Senate Bill 80. And then Senator McKay is finally stepping forward again, I should say, with his idea that golf courses should do some master planning on water and sets out requirements for that. That's Senate Bill 92. So a couple that could have pretty significant impact.
Great, thank you.
I didn't hear what he said about Senate Bill 8.
That was Senate Bill 92.
What is it about?
I don't know.
But
Well,
they'll monitor their use more.
yeah.
Master plan their usage.
Yeah.
But yeah, if I recall, having read that one, it applies to some studies that maybe Utah State would do to figure out how much water is being used, and it exempts that usage information from grandma. It's the same language that was out last year, I believe. But it's to try to do a study, more so than, because the original bill at one point was, like every golf course had to publicly report every gallon of water they're using. It's not that. It's more of this study.
Yeah,
It requires these water. It also develops water master planning criteria for the golf courses.
It's gonna vary in what part of the state you're in. I think it's crazy. Down here, we're gonna use more water than they're gonna use up in Salt Lake.
I do think, Warren, the tiered water bill will be different than Senate Bill 80.
Yes.
So for what that's worth, we can wait and see what comes out of that.
So Senate Bill 80 is directed specifically to drinking water.
Correct.
Whereas all Senate put on cases matters is going to be general. Tiers.
Yeah, there is tiered fee structure language in 80 as it now sits, but that's.
Yeah, on line 55, that's right.
Yeah.
Okay, thank you. That was good discussion. Open up to public comment. Anybody from the public want to bring anything up to the council? Seeing none, we'll move on to administrative updates. Anything there?
Yes, and I'll be quick. I have a few. One, Todd will no longer be attending these meetings to provide administrative updates on behalf of the division. I'll just be doing that going forward. Governor Cox has reappointed Marcel Shoup for another 4-year term as the environmental interest seat on this council, so that's awesome. This council's annual report to the legislature was accepted by the legislature. It's available to the public online. It has been distributed to all the local watershed councils. So that is great. The Division of Water Resources just hired our state water planner just very recently. So that's exciting. That's the first step in getting all the local councils involved in that process. So we'll give you more information when we know what that'll look like for you guys. And then lastly, I am planning to do another Watershed Council's breakfast at Water Users this year, which I think is March 18th and 19th. So I'll send out more information. I also just want to say, maybe remind each of your local councils about Water Users. We just learned on Monday or yesterday that the southeastern Utah portion of the state has never really had representatives go to that. So they had a discussion about getting at least a couple people from their council to attend and report back. And that is all of my updates.
Great, thank you, Carly. Appreciate that. And just one comment on the legislative subcommittee that we had and joined on. I think one covered a lot of these, but there's only 3 real topics that we discussed. One of them was the integration, I guess, with the Great Salt Lake Advisory Council, with the Great Salt Lake Watershed Council. So that was covered. We're going to continue on the way it is, the way it's currently structured for the next year or so. There was possible language change from Southeast Colorado River Watershed Council to the Southeastern Utah Watershed Council. So we talked about that. We don't have a problem with that. We'll figure out where we might be able to put that language in, or if we have a chance to do it this year. And then again, with Soren's comments, there were some possible language changes to add recreation and local government seats to the watershed councils. And I think the conclusion was, Warren, that there was no need to have that since we could add additional seats at any time, basically. Is that correct, Candice? Okay, so those are really the only three things that I remember being discussed in our subcommittee. So not too much. All right, well, we, again, really appreciate everybody's participation in the council meeting. And we hope everybody has a safe journey back home from here if you're going home. And with that, we'll adjourn this meeting. Okay, and I know we've got some other things coming up. I mean, we've
I don't
got,
know how many are gonna stay. We just had a little tour here, of the reservoir, our pump station, and
great.
Dirk's gonna kind of lead that along with my staff. They'll be down there.
How long
Oh,
would you budget
should
for
be
that?
just, 30 minutes is all. We're not gonna keep you when you wanna get on the road. It's fine. But I would seriously, open the invitation to have our meeting here in January. If people want to do that, we're open to that.
okay,
Good to see you all.
Bye, everyone.
Bye.